Today's daf we're going to be learning is Masechet Zevachim daf Tzadi Gimel. Today's daf is sponsored by Mindy and Eric Hecht in loving memory of Dr. Charles Feldman Zichrono Livracha. He would have loved to have been part of this learning community and is surely looking down on his many family members who learn the daf with much pride. He is missed every day. With that, we're going to get started with a question of Rami bar Hama. Ba'amine Rami bar Hama me Rav Chisda. So Rami bar Hama asked Rav Chisda the following question. If you remember, our topic is blood that gets on clothing or a cloth. It needs to be, if it's blood from a sacrifice, it needs to be washed in the azara. So now it says, Nitaz al beged tamei mahu. What if it goes on an impure cloth? Now the issue is that as soon as the blood hits the impure cloth, the blood becomes impure. Now why is this an issue? Well, Rav Huna is going to now explain this question a little better. There's actually a study guide to help a little bit with certainly the next part, which is more complicated. Rav Huna bereid Rav Yehoshua. So Rav Huna bereid Rav Yehoshua explains the following question. From the fact that he asked the question in this way, it seems clear, Shmami now, we can infer from here. If it was good, the blood, and then became disqualified, like impure, and then got on the cloth, it wouldn't need cleaning. Because, look, right? Now, when we say that, that's if first it became tamei, and then it hit the cloth. Okay? That seems very clear because that's not what he's asking. Aval bevat achad. Now, would we say, here are the two sides of the question. Do you say, though, if it happened bevat achad, right? When the tumah happens first, we understand it's already impure once it hits the cloth. But if it becomes tamei at the moment it hits the cloth, maybe we'll say no. Like, meaning, it might still need kibus. Oh, dilma lo shna, or maybe it makes no difference. Maybe either which way, it's now blood that's disqualified that's on the beged. So it's, who cares when it happened, when it became disqualified. It became disqualified as soon as it hits the beged that's impure. Right? Until now we were talking about a pure cloth that it hit. Nothing became impure here. But if it hits an impure cloth and becomes impure immediately, maybe that doesn't require kibus. That's the question. To get to the answer, it's going to take a little while. Okay, and for this I'm going to start sharing my screen. We're going to get to a big machloket here between Rabbi Elazar and the rabbis. Okay, so Amalei plugta to Rabbi Elazar v'Rabbanan. So he says the answer is, it's a machloket, Rabbi Elazar v'Rabbanan, aliba de Raba u'kedekamatari Abaye. The way Raba, now it's not really aliba de Raba, it's not really according to what Raba says, it's according to what Raba says, and then Abaye questions it, and then the way Abaye understands it. So what we're going to have here is, we're going to have a difference of opinion. There's two charts here, okay, because there's a machloket within a machloket. We're going to have three opinions as to the machloket between Rabbi Elazar and the rabbis. We're going to have Rava, Abaye, and Rava. Now, Abaye's answer to this is going to be exactly the answer to the question. It depends whether you hold like Rabbi Elazar or the rabbis. But within that, we're going to see Rabba's opinion, Rava's opinion that are totally relevant to the question. And within that, there's going to be a machloket about how to understand a different machloket, Rabbi Akiva and the rabbis. I know this sounds very confusing. It's going to all make sense as we go through. So my point is, you're going to need a lot of patience till we get to actually what the answer is to this question. And you might forget the question in the meantime, but I'll remind you when we get there. So here comes the braita. Ditanya. Rabbi Elazar omer, me chatat shenitmu metaharim, sha'arein nida mazin aleha. Me chatat is para aduma waters. You can sprinkle on someone, okay, you sprinkle on the third and seventh day to purify someone who became impure to a dead body. And you can do it even if they became impure. Okay? They still, if you took impure mechatat and you sprinkled them on someone, they would work. How does he know that? Shaharei, that nida, a woman who's a nida. Now, the assumption here is we're talking about a nida. Woman is an impure nida when she's also a tamei mate. Okay? Now, even though she's a nida and she's right now has impurity on her, we sprinkle the waters on her. Now, when those waters get to the woman, or perhaps we're even going to say right now, maybe even before they get to her, they become impure, and yet they still work to purify her. So I'm a Raba. Now, we don't really understand this connection yet. We're going to figure it out. That's why I said something that it sort of depends how we interpret it. I'm a Raba. Rabbi Elazar b'shitat Rabbi Akiva Rabo Amara. When he said this, he was saying it in the name of Rabbi Akiva, his rabbi. Okay, well, what's Rabbi Akiva? Da'amao. If you pass a vessel over something that's impure, meaning the airspace, and the airspace over it It's as if you put it down. There's a concept that comes up in Shabbat. It's called kluta k'misha chadamia, which is if something goes in the airspace. Now for Shabbat, it's a different issue. You need something to rest on the ground in order for, in order to be liable for carrying something from one domain to the other, it has to rest. What if it just went through the airspace of that domain but didn't rest? So there's a concept that if it goes in the airspace, it's as if it rested. So here also, if it goes in the airspace, it's as if it rested. So what does that mean? Okay, so let's give a case. We're going to see it right now where Rabbi Akiva says this, ditnan, and then we'll see how this connects to the nida. Haya omed chutz l'tanur, v'sheretz b'tanur. So if you're outside, or no, you're not outside. It doesn't matter where you are, but you're there. There's an oven next to you, and then there's a ledge, okay, a window. So, which in those days a window was a ledge. So in between you and the window, now on the windowsill we're going to learn is a jug of mei chatat, the paraduma waters. In the tanur is a sheretz, which means the tanur is tameh. Right? There's a creepy crawler which carries impurity and makes the whole tanur impure. V'oshit yado lechalon. Now it's you, the oven, and the window. You now take your arm, put it over the window, over the oven. Hoshit yado lechalon, into the window. V'natala talagin, and you took the jug. V'hevi ro al pi tanur, and now you carried it over the tanur. Rabbi Akiva mitameh, he says that jug of mei chatat is impure. Chachamim mitarim, and the Chachamim say it's tahor. Now, what's the machloket according to Raba? How's Raba going to explain the machloket? Exactly what we said. To Rabbi Akiva savar kimunach dami, the fact that you pass this mei chatat over the oven means that it basically got impure as it went over the oven. This works, by the way, like what? Like dead people. Okay, you have a kezayit of a dead body on the ground, okay, or you have a burial plot, right? This is why the issue is of going around in cemeteries. The tomb goes up. Okay, so Rabbi Akiva savar kemunach dami. It's as if it was there. V'Rabbanan savar lav kemunach dami. It's not as if it was in the. It wasn't in at all, and the tomb doesn't go up like that, and therefore it's pure. Now, what does this have to do with Rabbi Elazar and the mei chatat? So, in other words, here, first we have this machloket, Rabbi Akiva and the rabbis. Rabbi Akiva is mitameh, the rabbis are mitarim. Rabbi Akiva says it's like as if it rested there, and the rabbis say no. And then the Gemara says, what Rabbi is saying is that Rabbi Elazar is exactly Rabbi Akiva. Now, he holds like Rabbi Akiva that what? When the main idah comes onto the woman, we want an example, okay, where mei chatat nitmeu mitarim. If they're impure, they could still work. So now we want to show that with the nida, first the mei chatat got impure. Why? Because when you spray water, the mei chatat, on this woman, it first enters her airspace. And when it enters her airspace, the tuma that she has on her, right, she's a nida, that tuma gets on the water, right, ruins the mei chatat. And then yet it doesn't ruin it because she still becomes tahorah from it. Right now, how do they know she becomes Torah from this? There's just no reason to think not. Just because she's a nida doesn't mean she can't get purified from the tumat mate. And the commentaries say she goes into the mikvah once she's done with her nida stuff anyway. You also have the mikvah, but the mei chatat can purify her. This for what they need to purify. It's not enough yet. She still needs to go in the mikvah, but they can work. So the fact that before they even get to her, they're already impure, that's exactly it. That's what we're looking for. And that's how he explains Rabbi Elazar. Abaye. Abaye says, wait a minute. I don't agree with you about how you understand the machlokes of Rabbi Akiva and the rabbis. No way, no how. Because I'll quote you a braita. Modeh Rabbi Akiva b'haza'ah she'evira al gabei kli cheres tamei or al gabei mishkav u'boshav tamei. If you pass a vessel, okay, you have haza'ah, you have mei chatat, that you passed over a kli cheres that was impure, an earthenware vessel that was impure, or something that people sit on or lied on, that's impure. She'i torah. What you passed over it is definitely not impure. Even Rabbi Akiva agrees with that. So then why is he mitameh in the oven case? So first of all, why not? Why is it clear that Rabbi Akiva agrees? Because there's only unique cases where this tumah goes up. Where's that? In a dead body, in a tent, okay, like especially if there's a tent that's open. First of all, the tent, it goes through everything in the tent. Okay, even on the sides. If it's open, then it goes straight up. And Eben Minugat, that's a unique halacha by a leper's house, where also the tomb is like tumat olah. Anyway, Those are the only cases where we have such a thing. We don't have such a thing that the water, before it gets onto the woman, it becomes impure because it enters her airspace. That maybe is a concept in Shabbat. It's not a concept in Tumah, other than the unique cases where it is. So El Amar Abaye says that can't be it. So I'm going to explain the machloken in a different way. Everyone agrees it's not as if the water rested on the woman. What's the mechatat? It's not like the mechatat got onto the sheretz. So then why does Rabbi Akiva say when you put your arm over that barrel, over that oven, and you take the jug and you pass it over the oven, why is it impure? Well, Rabbi Akiva Safar Gazlinan Shemayanuach. We're worried that maybe he'll put it down. Because we don't want you passing your arm with something that's, you have to be so careful with, because maybe you're going to put it inside. But Rabbanan Savri Lo Gazrina, and the rabbis hold, no, we're not worried about that. Umode Rabbi Akiva, but in our case, Mode Rabbi Akiva b'haza'ah, kevan de nafik nafak. In the case of haza'ah, though, with the woman in the nida, it's definitely, there's no reason for gzera here. These cases aren't comparable at all. Because what are we worried about? If I put my arm over the oven, where there's a sheretz inside, and I go get the jug, and I bring it back to me, I might put it down. But if I'm sprinkling water on this nida woman, as soon as it leaves my hand, there's no worry I'm going to put it onto the woman. That's like I'm going to place it on all the mechatat I have in my hand, because it's left my hand. Whatever is there left my hand already. There's no reason to say, oh, maybe you'll put it in something tameh in the meantime. So that's different. Or the case really with the mazeh on top of the mishkav umoshav, right? You throw it over something. Well, we're not worried that you're going to actually make it impure. Okay, now we get back to our topic. So, now, if you remember, this is what we're looking for. How Abaye explains Rabbi Elazar. So if he doesn't explain Rabbi Elazar that the nida is like the mechatat because it gets tameh first and we still use it, and likewise mechatat that became impure you could still use in general, well, how is he going to explain it? So here he says, Rabbi Elazar v'Rabbanan b'may kamipalge. What's the root of their machloket? Amar Abaye b'danim tum'ah keduma mitum'ah sheba'ot ha'sha'ah kamiflage. Their question is, of course, the nida. When did the mechatat become impure? When they touched the nida, just like. Okay, let's go back to Rami bar Hama's question. If you sprinkled blood, or blood got sprinkled on an impure beged, right, an impure cloth or clothing, and when it hits at that moment, that it's going to also have a requirement of kibus, but also at that same moment became tameh, does it still need kibus? Same thing here. So here we're going to say the following. With the nida, at the moment the water gets on her, it becomes impure. Can you learn from, and it's okay, can you learn from that case to a case where the mechatat first became impure and then we want to use them to purify? That's the question. So the rabbis, so Rabbi Elazar holds, Mar Savar Danim, he says you can learn one from the other, and that's why he says, yeah, mechatat shenitmu mitari. Why? Because the nida mazin aleh. Because the nida mazin aleh. Now the rabbis disagree because they say ain't danim. You can't learn from a nida where it only became impure when it hit her. That's different from if it became impure before. So you can't learn from one to the other according to the rabbis. Now that's the answer to the question, because according to Rami bar Hama, it depends whether you're Rabbi Elazar or the rabbis. If it hits the beged tameh, is that like a case where it became tameh first? Or it became tameh at the same time and it hit the beged? If we say you can learn one from the other, then yes, it's going to be the same and you're not going to have to do kibus. If you say you can't learn from one to the other, then you would have to do kibus, because when it hit the beged, it actually was pure and it only became impure at that moment. So that's the answer to Rami bar Hama's question, which really is a weird not a weird answer, but it's not exactly the best answer, because the answer is it's a machloket between Rabbi Elazar and the rabbis. Okay, Rava Amar. Now we have one last explanation. Okay, I'm going to stop the share screen, but I'm going to bring it back for one more minute. Now, so that was just to point out, we had two explanations of the Rabbi Akiva rabbis machloket, Raba and Abaye, and those affected how they understood the machloket Rabbi Elazar and the rabbis. In other words, Raba thought they were connected, so from there he extended what he said there to here. Abaye said, no, that has nothing to do with it, and he had to come up with some other answer. Rava is going to give a third answer to what Rabbi Elazar and the rabbis are disagreeing about. Rava Amar, and with that we'll finish this sugya. Rava Amar, dekule alma indani. Everybody agrees you can't learn one from the other. What's the machloket then? To Rabbi Elazar saval haza'at tzricha shi'ur u'mitztarfin lahaza'ot. For Rabbanan savrei haza'ah ein tzricha shi'ur. If there's a minimum required amount for haza'ah, for the sprinkling, then, which Rabbi Elazar holds, then we can explain this whole thing. Number one, there's a minimum required amount. Number two, every bit you put adds up to that required amount. So, right, you drip a few drops, and then a few more drops, and a few more drops. Altogether, that will be your, eventually you'll get to the amount that you need. Why is this relevant? Well, if that's the case, then we no longer have that the moment you became impure, right, the moment the water hits her, it actually becomes impure. But it actually doesn't yet purify her. And now these cases become completely parallel. The nida case is completely parallel to the mei chatat that became impure. Can they work to be metaher? Yes. Because these mei chatat hit the woman before they actually work to purify her. And as they hit her, they become tamei because she's tameah. Right? She's got tumat made on her. She's got tumat nida on her. And every time they hit her, they become impure. And until we get a certain requisite amount, she's actually not going to be pure. By the time we get the requisite amount, all the water that's hit her is already impure, and yet it still works. So there you see, we can learn from nida to mei chatat that became impure, and then we use them to purify someone else. And the rabbis say we can't learn from one to the other because haza'ah doesn't need a shiur. There's no shiur. The second it hits her, it already becomes impure. And that's not the same, but that's the whole point. It hits her first, at that moment, becomes impure. That's not the same as becoming impure earlier, and then trying to say, can that work to purify someone? So that's the machloket, 3 explanations to that machloket. Now we're going to move on. The Mishnah says, chatat psula, okay, ein damata un kibus, whether it had a shat kosher, whether it didn't have a shat kosher, okay, whether it was good to begin with and then became impure, or whether it's not even, never was good to begin with at all. Either which way, it's disqualified. So Tana Rabbanan, we're going to see where we get this from the psukim. Midama, okay, you have to read the psukim. Again, all the psukim are on the sheet, so we can look at the sheet. Top of your sheet has the psukim. It says here in the psukim, I have to fix the numbers. The numbers I did a little bit wrong, but you can ignore that for right now. It says in pasuk, pasuk kaf, which here is labeled by accident. Okay, but hopefully by the time, if you're not watching on YouTube, it should be right by the time you see this. In pasuk kaf, which here is labeled yud tet, kol asher yigav sara yikdash, va'asher yizeh midama labeged. This is the important part. From what is sprinkled from its blood, from the blood on the cloth. Now, why from the blood? Midam kshera v'lo midam psula. From always means not all. So if it's midama, from the blood means some blood, not all the blood. Rabbi Akiva omer, haytala shata kosher v'nifsala, damata un kibus. Rabbi Akiva holds, now, what does it mean, dam kshera, not dam psula? So he says, dam psula is, if it had a shat kosher and became disqualified, actually that's like dam kosher, like good blood. And you're going to need kibus for that. He disagrees with what we saw in the Mishnah. Lo haytala shat kosher, if it was never good to begin with, v'nifsala, right? And then couldn't have been used to begin with, and it was nifsala, ein damata un kibus. Okay, then it wouldn't need kibus. Rabbi Shimon omer, echad ze v'echad ze, ein damata un kibus. He says either which way, it doesn't matter whether it could have been used, not been used, it doesn't matter. It never has. Never needs kibus if it's disqualified. My time at Rabbi Shimon, where does he get it from? Well, ktiv ota uchtiv midama. Now he goes 2 psukim later, it says kol zachar b'kohanim yochal ota. Now it's a different context, but it's still within these same psukim. Ota is just it. And midama means also not all of it. So he says there's 2 limitations. Chad lehechad haytala shata kosher, and it's missing words here, but it should be chad delo lelo haytala shata kosher. And each one eliminates another category. For Rabbi Akiva, what does he do with the word ota then if he doesn't think it's limiting? Well, ota prat latruma. He says that's coming to say you kol zachar b'kohanim yochal ota. Okay, this is really the din of morach v'shutaf b'mayim, that if you had your food in a clean choshet, kodshin, you have to rinse it out with water, but that is not true for truma, only for kodshin. Rabbi Shimon, so what does he do, right? Ota, specifically that needs those laws. Rabbi Shimon, well, he doesn't need a drasha for that, because he goes l'tamei da'amar, kodshin kalim ein tuni mirika u'shtifa, koshken truma. He says there's a machloket about whether the mirika and shtifa is kodshim, or also kochim kalim, all sacrifices, or just the high-level ones. Now, if you say it's not the low-level ones, then truma is even less than that. So obviously, if it's not relevant for that, it's obviously not relevant for truma, in which case you don't need a special drasha to eliminate truma from this category. Okay, new Mishnah. Nitaz minatzaval ala beged. Eino ta'un kibus. If it sprinkles from your neck, I'm sorry, not from your neck, from the neck of the animal, straight onto the cloth, eino ta'un kibus. You don't need kibus. We're now going to go into at what point does the kibus start and at what point does it end? So, when it's in the animal, obviously not. When it comes out of the animal and goes straight onto the beged, also not. Only once, we're going to see later, but it's obvious, when it goes into the vessel, the sanctified vessel, and from there it goes onto your cloth. What's the outer limit? Well, mina keren umini yasod ento kibus. If it already went on the keren, you already did the mitzvah, or on the yasod, then you don't need kibus. Remember, we're talking about the chatat. The chatat goes on the kranot, on the corners. Nishbach ala ritzpa v'asefo. If it fell on the floor and you collected the blood, also ento kibus, and then it splatters on your clothes, it doesn't need kibus, because again, that wasn't stuff that you could use on the altar. Now they give a rule. The only time you need kibus, this washing, is if it was dam that was accepted in a vessel and collected in a vessel and blood that you can sprinkle, meaning not blood that you already sprinkled and you don't need to. Later we're going to say, what is this line adding? Because we don't really need it. We already know the rule from the cases. Tanu Rabbanan, Yachol nitaz min atzavar ala beged tu'un kibus. Talmud lomar asher yazeh. So you might think if it goes straight from the neck, you might also need kibus, but it says asher yazeh. Now, this was the pasuk we just read, asher yazeh midama. If from the blood, right, it sprinkles on your clothes. Now, why does it use the language yazeh? Well, yazeh must be coming to tell you, specifically, lo amarti lecha ela bero'oi lahaza'ah. The yazeh is a reference to the sprinkling of the blood. So it's only blood that you can theoretically sprinkle on the altar. And if not, then, right, it comes straight from the neck, you can't. Tanya idach, another braita, yachol nitaz min hakeren u'min yesod yeheton kibus. These are all midrashei halacha, getting to the halacha from the psukim. So you might have, and also kind of suggest, maybe you would think this, you might have thought, even after it goes on the keren or the yesod, maybe you would need kibus to launder the cloth. Talmud lomar asher yazeh. Now it says not just yazeh, which is a reference to hazaot, but it says asher yazeh, which is that will sprinkle, which means, again, drasha, because that's not what it's talking about, but only blood that still needs to be sprinkled on the altar, and not blood that was already, excludes masha kfar huza, what already was sprinkled. Nishbach ala ritzpa. What if it spills on the floor? So now what they really want to get at is not that one. If it spills on the floor, it doesn't need kibus. But ain't un kibus aladam shenitkabel b'kliver or lahazah. That line they're going to ask about, turning out amabet. Hatu lamali. What do we need all this for? So they say, why do you need that last line? We already know it. Matam kamar. It's actually coming to give the reason for the previous line. Matam nishpach ala ritzpa v'asefo ain't un kibus. Why, if it fell on the floor and you gathered it, does it not need kibus? Lefisha ain't un kibus aladam shenitkabel b'kliver or lahazah. Because it's only blood that can go, right? That was collected in a vessel. This wasn't. And can be used to sprinkle, and this can't be. Ra'oi lahaza'ah lemi'utemai. So now why does it say, what's ra'oi lahaza'ah at that last sentence? This is a classic. When it gives a rule, what's the rule coming for? So we just said actually it's coming to explain the previous line, but they're saying that this must exclude something else. Let's say you gathered the blood from the animal, and you gathered a little bit, not enough to sprinkle in one vessel, and not enough to sprinkle in another vessel. And even if you put the two together into one vessel and you had enough blood, still, and then when it sprinkles from there onto the baguette, it's not going to be. Why? Because you can't actually do the blood in that way. Okay, that we're going to see from a drasha later on. Titania, as we see here. Okay, we're going to start with this. Rabbi Chalafta bar Shaul Omer. Now he's talking about a different topic, so patience. He's talking about a similar thing with mei chatat, with the paraduma waters that we talked about. You mix the ashes into the water. Let's say you made two bowls with the mei chatat, with the ashes in it, but each one didn't have enough for sprinkling. Lo kidesh. None of it's good. You can't use it at all, even if you mix the two together. Now, Ibayalahu, they asked, bidam mahu. Could you use it for sprinkling blood, though? Do we say, here are the two sides, hilchatahi, this is just a halacha l'Moshe Sinai, because we don't necessarily know that we learned it from a pasuk, it must be just a tradition, and maybe it's just true for paraduma, how do we know we can learn it to other things? O dilma, or perhaps, hatam, my time, adiktiv v'taval b'mayim, hachanami ktiv v'taval b'dam. Both of them needed dipping. In the case of you dip this hyssop branch in the chatat into the water, and from there you sprinkle it. In the blood, for the chatat, if you remember, the kohen puts his finger into the blood. Both of them talk about dipping. So perhaps in both of them, there has to be dipped from the beginning, and they learn from the psukim, and what's true for chatat would be true for the blood. So which one is it? So Tashma, they say, let's learn from here. Amar Rabbi Zreika, Amar Rabbi Elazar, Af bidam lo kidesh. Okay, now they're going to say here, Rabbi Elazar says it explicitly. Bidam lo kidesh. Even bidam, it's not going to be good. Rava, and now Rava is going to say Tanya nami hachi. It's missing some words here, but it should say Tanya nami hachi. I'm going to bring a braita to support this. This is halachot we learned earlier in the Masechet and Daf Mem. Vitaval, if you remember from all the chataot pnimiyot, the inner ones, the par, and what's the extra word par for? We had all those drashot. There we learn, one of the things we learned, maybe the par there is to teach you that these halachot are true also for the other par. Vitaval velo mesapeg. Bidam ad bidam shiur tefila mi'ikaro. So these first two we saw previously. Vitaval means you have to dip your finger in the blood. You can't use your finger and just stick it around the edges and get the blood off the edges. You have to actually dip it into where the blood is. Bidam teaches you that you need ad bidam shiur tefila mi'ikaro. You have to have enough to dip your finger in from the beginning. That's our halacha. So here you see that it's said explicitly, and you don't have to learn it necessarily from chatat, but it is the same as chatat because we learn it explicitly from here. And then there's another drasha, which is different than the third one we had in the other place, but min adam should be yan. Okay, what does Rashi say min adam should be yan is? Rashi says min adam should be yan is, because it's very hard to say, from the blood that we were talking about. What does that mean? So Rashi says, tefila she'izam mimenu rishona yazet kulan. Okay, there's missing some words here, but you might have thought you can just dip your finger in and then sprinkle. Now we're talking about the chatat pnimiyot, where you had to, like the par lim devar shel tzibor, the par kohen Mashiach, you had to go into the kodesh, into the echal, and sprinkle your finger right from your finger onto the parochet. So he says you can't. What this is saying, min adam should be yan. You have to use the blood for each time you sprinkle. You have to put your finger in again and sprinkle. You can't use the remainder on your fingers. Okay, we're going to see this inside in another minute because it's not so clear from here yet. So the first thing they're doing is talking about these first two drashot. Why do you need each one? If it just said v'taval, you would have thought, even if you don't have enough from the beginning, as long as you can dip your finger now, who cares if you mix from two bowls? Therefore, that there has to be enough dam in there from the beginning. Now, if it just said bedam, you would have thought, havamina, as long as there's enough to dip, but you don't actually have to dip your finger. Afilu misapeg, even if you stick your finger around. By the way, we had this itzrich earlier, we had this sugya. Katav rachmana vitaval. And that's why they said vitaval. Min hadam shabinyan l'miutei mai. Now we go back to this min hadam shabinyan. What does that come? What's that coming to say? Now Rashi helped us already based on this Gemara, but we'll explain now. To say that you can't sprinkle with the remainders on your finger. This is a topic we're going to talk about a little bit for the next little bit. This statement of Rava, that saying this min adam shebein, this drasha, comes to exclude the shirayim, actually supports a statement of Rabbi Elazar. Tamar Rabbi Elazar, shirayim shebe'etzba psulim. Okay, because that's what Rabbi Elazar said. So now we have Rabbi Elazar and Rava saying the same thing. The extra blood in your finger you can't use to sprinkle. Now we're going to have a difficulty with this. Amarle Ravim Barav Ada LeRava. So Ravim Barav Ada says to Rava, Amre Talmidech Amr of Amram. Your student said the name of Rav Amram, Tanina. Here we have a braita that's going to raise a difficulty on you. Hayamazeh v'nidza haza'am yado. Ad sheloiza te'un kibus. Mishiza ein te'un kibus. If you're sprinkling in the hechal, and some of it leaves your finger, until you finish doing the sprinkling, you need to do kibus, if the blood gets from your finger onto the clothes. Once you're finished, mishiza, when you finish sprinkling, ain't te'un kibus, it doesn't need it anymore. Now, what does it mean finish sprinkling? Or before sprinkling, after sprinkling? So my love, at first they think, and this is going to be the difficulty, hachi kamar, reads like this. Ad shelo gamar milahazot te'un kibus. Until you finish sprinkling all the sprinklings, any blood that gets from your finger, even if, you sprinkled, you go back to get more, even on the way there, on the way back, when you're not actually using that finger to sprinkle anymore, it still needs kibus. Mishigamar lahazot ain't te'un kibus. But once you finish completely, then it doesn't need kibus anymore. Now, this would seem to imply, though, that blood that's still on your finger, you could actually be mazeh, because otherwise, why would it need kibus if you're done with what your job was? Right? If you can't sprinkle from that finger anymore until you dip it again, that blood shouldn't really need kibus. So that seems to disagree with Rava and Rabbi Elazar. But they say, lo, hachikam. No, read it differently. Actually, when you're on your way with your finger, after you dipped it in the blood to do the sprinkling, and it gets on your clothes, you're going to need kibus. But but once you've finished your sprinkle and you're about to go back to get more blood, at that point, if the blood gets on your clothes, you don't need to do the washing of it. Okay, so first question resolved. Second question. Abaye raises a difficulty now. Now here we're talking about the paraduma, where there's also sprinkling of blood after you slaughter the paraduma, and then you sprinkle blood. You're outside the Abaye, you're at Har Zeitim, and you sprinkle blood toward the Abaye. So after you're finished doing the sprinkling, you wipe your hand on the body of the para. Why on the body of the para? Because we're going to take the para and burn it, and it says in the pasuk, you're supposed to burn the para with its or, and basal, and dama. So you have to burn it with its blood. So therefore, any blood that comes from it, you have to put back on the para. Now, what does it sound like? Gamar in. When do you wipe off your hands from the blood? Only at the end. Lo gamar lo. Now, not if you didn't finish, you don't have to wipe your hands. Now, if you don't have to wipe your hands, then your hands still have the old blood on it, and then you're sprinkling from the old blood, right? Where you're not supposed to sprinkle with the old blood. So Amar Lei said to him, Gamal mekanech. What does it really mean? Gamar mekanech yodo b'kfasha para. Now, when you're completely done with all that, it's true. You wipe your hand on the para, but notice it says your hand. Now, until now, we're talking about your finger dipping, not your whole hand. So why are you wiping your whole hand? The whole hand is in case you have blood from the para and all that. That's one thing. That's not this. This, lo gamar, if you didn't finish the sprinkling, but in between sprinklings, mekanech be'etzba'o, then you just wipe off your finger. Okay? And that's because you make sure you don't have remainder of the blood on your finger anymore. Now, what do you do with this remainder? So, bishlama gamar mekanech yodo b'kfasha para. So, when you're done with the whole process, so we understand, you take your hand and you wipe it on the para, on the cow, so that, on the heifer, so that you can burn it. Because it says we're going to burn the para, and therefore, you need it to be on the para. But because again, the dam is supposed to be burnt with it. But where are you wiping your finger exactly? So Abaye b'sfat mizrach k'dichtiv k'forei zahav. Okay, and when they came back to Abaye Sheni, it says they had all these utensils, and it said k'forei zahav in the pasuk. What is k'forei? From kapara. What is kapara? To atone. But what does it really mean? To clean. So these vessels were called cleaning, like gold folim. Now, what does it mean folim? Because you would clean your hands in them. You would wipe your finger inside, and that would get off the blood. Okay. With that, we finish that section. Moving on to the Mishnah. Nitaz ala or. Now, what if you put it on hide of an animal? So we talked about blood on a beged. It needs kibus. What about on the hide of an animal? Ad shelo hufshat eno te'un kibus. Mishuvshat te'un kibus. Well, while it's still on the animal. Now, the whole thing here is we're looking for something that's mekabel trumah. That's ra'oi, right, like a beged. It's susceptible to impurity. Susceptible to impurity, then it's going to need kibus. Those things go hand in hand. But a piece of leather, now when it's on the animal, it's definitely not. When you take it off the animal, it's also sort of is, sort of not. It really depends. If you plan to use it for just a cover on a couch or something, just throw it over something to sit on, so it's actually already a utensil. But if you're planning to use it for something else, like a shoe, then it's not really a utensil right now because it's standing around to wait to be a shoe. So it needs some sort of thought involved. Now, if you didn't think anything, then it's not yet a vessel. But according to the first opinion here, Rabbi Yehuda, he doesn't care because mishuv shat te'un kibus, it already needs kibus because it could potentially, at some point, it's going to become ra'oi l'kabel tumah when you do something with it. Rabbi Elazar omer af mishuv shat ein te'un kibus, because he says, right, you don't need kibus yet because it's not yet a vessel. Okay, eno te'un kibus, right? Ela makom hadam. So now, when do you need kibus? I actually didn't read it right. It should be Rabbi Elazar Amar Af Mishuv Shat Nikud, period. Then, Eino Te'un Kibus. When do you really need kibus? Makom Adam. Only, first of all, the place where the blood is. You don't need the whole cloth to be, or the whole hide to be washed. Just the place where there's blood. Davar Shu Ra'oi L'Kabel Tumah, as I said, has to be something susceptible to impurity. Ra'oi L'Kibus has to be something you can launder. Echad ha'beged ve'echad ha'sak ve'echad ha'or tunin kibus. Whether it's cloth, whether it's a sack, okay, which is made usually of goat hairs, and echad ha'or, also leather, tunin kibus. Va'kibus b'makom kadosh. Okay, you have to do it in the azara. Ushvirat kli cheres, also the breaking of the earthenware vessels that you put the sanctified meat in. Also that happens b'makom kadosh, in the azara. And mirikan shtifa b'klei nechoshet, and in the klei nechoshet, right, there's the earthenware that you have to break. There's the metal ones, the copper ones, where you do it also. You have to do the mirikan shtifa, the cleaning out of them, also b'makom kadosh. This is a bit of a strange line that's hard to understand. This is a chomer of chatat over other sacrifices. Now, what things are we referring to? So, for sure, kibus is only for chatat. That's how we started our chapter, right? With the chatat, dam chatat. So, right, it's even the name of the chapter. It's the blood from the chatat. Some people say that also marika and shtifa, there's a machloket about whether marika and shtifa is only for chatat, or also for all kodshei kodashim as well, or also for all korbanot. Okay, we saw that before. So this is a chumrah. What this is referring to is a bit of a debate, but definitely it's referring to the blood, at least that. So that's where chatat is more severe than kodshei kodashim, because it needs, right, the ola and asham, which are kodshei kodashim also, don't need the blood to be, any blood to be washed out of the garment in the azara. Okay, the Gemara is now going to ask, we're almost done for today's daf, Minani, immediately, where do we get this from? Detanu Rabanan, beged, right? How do we get the or? Beged ainli ala beged, right? So it says in the pasuk, you have to wash the beged. Minayin the rabot or mishuv shat. How do we know the or once it's taken off the animal, that the hide, that you have to also wash it? Tamud lamal, asher yazeh alav techabes. Asher yazeh alav, anything that sprinkles on, it sounds like. It's a general word, not just the cloth, also something else. It must be including or. Maybe it's even before, when it's still on the animal. Now, it has to be something like a beged. And here we get where we get that it has to be makabel tuma. Because what typifies a beged? Ma beged hara'oi lekabel tuma, it's susceptible to impurity. Av kol hara'oi lekabel tuma, divrei Rabbi Yehuda. And that's where we get Rabbi Yehuda's opinion from. Now we're going to see Rabbi Elazar. That we'll leave for next class. Then we're going to say Rabbi Elazar Omer, beged ainli ala beged. And what he's going to include is the sak, right? Because he doesn't necessarily include the or. Anyway, with this, we'll stop for today and here. So we started with this question of Rami bar Hama, where nitaz al-beged tameh mahu, because it becomes tameh at that moment, and then from there we had the whole thing about the nida and the mei chatat that became impure and then were sprayed onto something, and where the mei nida, the way we explained it according to Abaye, was when they hit her, and then we can learn from one to the other, and that's exactly like Rami bar Hama. And then it depends whether you're Rabbi Elazar or the rabbis, what you say about the nida woman. And then we got from there, right, there were three explanations of really what this machloket Rabbi Elazar and the rabbis is about, and only according to Abaye was this one relevant to this situation, to answer the question. Then we moved on to the drashot, about how we get that the chatat psula, right, whether it had shak kosher or not shak kosher, or the machloket between Rabbi Shimon and Rabbi Akiva about that, and what their drashot are. From there we got to different, from when until when is the blood going to require kibus, and from there we had some ins and outs about that. What are these things? What do those words mean? Why they give the principle at the end of the Mishnah? From there we got to these drashot on the taval b'dam and minadam and all that. And then we had this extra drasha about the shirayim and the etzba, right? That's what we understood, minadam. And then we had some questions on that halacha, that the shirayim and adam can't be used for sprinkling. We asked two difficulties, but we resolved them. And then we got to this last machloket about the or, once the hide is taken off the animal, do we view it as if it's potentially susceptible to impurity and then kibus would apply or not? That we saw machloket about, and what other materials this applies to as well, not just cloth. With that, we finish for today. Wishing everyone a good day and a Chanukah Sameach.